video he saw. This is a video I put out that promised boredom. So anyway, I have to say, I'd love to bring my kids here. That's it. However, I think if I did, but it's a fantastic screen, but I think they want to take this screen back with me. Yeah, so anyway, how are you all? You feeling well? Yeah. We knew that already, of course, because Vitality basically is sort of recording everything that you're doing. So halfway through this presentation, obviously, you're all going to have to get up, you're going to have to move around, shake a leg, all that kind of stuff. So I also have to apologise basically for the awesome lack of diversity that I show basically in these sort of modern times that we live in. As you can see, basically I'm a white middle-aged man and I'm relatively middle class. However, you know, what I can promise you basically is I'm taking anti-aging drugs and my wife is spending all my money. So I am working basically on my diversity issues. As Kevin said, my name is Matthew Griffin and I spend a lot of my time trying to get clickers to work. And the rest of the time, when clickers don't work, I sometimes do the odd presentation here or there. Here we go, it works now. So what I'm going to try and present here today basically is what I regard basically as the future of exponential healthcare. I work with a whole variety of different organisations. I work typically between the dates of 2020 and 2070. The reason why I go beyond 2040 is because I work with 3 prime ministers. I work with all of the G7 and a variety of G20 countries. And if you're building a country, if you're building a welfare state, if you are building a set of cities or whatever it happens to be, you're less interested in 5 years, you're more interested in the longer term stuff. However, I do go all the way basically from near term all the way through to the far off. I help Samsung design the next 20 years of devices and the things that come after the smartphone, the same with Huawei. I work with Qualcomm on intelligent machines, so that's things like semiconductors, that's where we talk about biological computing and all these sorts of bits and bobs. I work with Microsoft based on their AI strategy, and I work with, if you go to Dubai, I work with Dubai's RTA authority based on everything from the future of education all the way through to future of transportation and society, agriculture, and all these kinds of things. I also sit on the board of Centrica, and we are essentially trying to reinvent European energy grids as we speak. So, I first have to apologise because all of you think that what I'm really going to be doing is presenting on the future of healthcare. What I'm really doing is I'm presenting on the future of you and time. Because healthcare has an incredible benefit to you all. How would you change your perception if I said, we have the technology coming through that can extend your lives by 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, or even more? Would you start looking at your own lives differently? Would you start looking, for example, at climate change differently, as opposed to thinking that you were going to shuffle off the mortal coil in 2060, 70, or 80, when the global temperatures have gone up by 2 to 3 degrees Celsius? Would you start recycling more? In addition to that, if you have children and grandchildren, we're increasingly entering an age basically where the average age will be going up between 100 to 150. And I'm going to show you some of the technologies that will help us do that. So this is fundamentally a presentation about how we give you as individuals time back. But I want to first take you through the new world. It's no surprise basically that today the rate of change basically is accelerating. If you step back 10 years ago, the rate of change was slower. If you step forward 10 years, inevitably the rate of change is going to be faster. If I stepped back to the 1980s and 1990s and 1990s and I said to you, what do you think your businesses are going to be able to do next year that maybe they couldn't do this year? From a technology perspective, you might look at something like Moore's Law and say, well, next year it's likely that we're going to be able to buy faster computer chips for cheaper. We're going to have more networking, more bandwidth, all this kind of stuff. And I said, well, what does that mean for your businesses? I said, well, maybe we can process more data. Maybe we can communicate with more people, whatever it happens to be. You could plan things. Life was actually, ironically, a little bit more linear then. One of the biggest challenges that organizations have today is we have so many different technologies hitting us all at the same time that this creates a confusing situation. Because just as your IT suppliers are telling you to move to the cloud, they're also telling you to become digital. They're then telling you basically that you should be looking at the blockchain. They're then telling you about this great thing called artificial intelligence. They're then, depending on the industry that you're in, talking to you about robotics, artificial intelligence, gene sequencing, gene editing, whatever it happens to be. You haven't got your heads around the first set of stuff yet. You haven't transformed your organizations for the first tranche of disruptive waves that have been coming through yet. And yet there are already more waves breaking on your company. With all of these technologies basically that are coming through, the one universal truth that we see is they drive the cost of individual transactions to zero. Whatever the cost, whatever those transactions are, whether it's compute, whether it's network, whether it's work, everything gets driven to zero. Energy is driving to zero. If you go and have a look at your energy bills at the moment, it's likely that you're paying about 12 kilowatts per hour. Out in Dubai, we're already generating electricity at 0.2 cents. Everything gets driven to zero. The cost of delivering services and building services gets driven to zero. As a consequence of all of this, we see a lot more startups coming through. So over the past 5 to 6 years, there have been 100 million new startups registered in the world. If you think about becoming a software company, if you wanted to be a software company 20 years ago, a decent one, you'd have to have a couple of million in the bank. Now if you want to become a software company, you can hire a load of workers basically out of the gig economy, use a low-code platform or a no-code application development platform, off you go. The bar is lower. So as a consequence, on the left-hand side, we have a lot more entrepreneurial spirit basically coming through. We've got a lot more entrepreneurs and startups coming through. And if you really want to start accelerating and changing the world, the people on the left do what they traditionally do. They identify needs. So for example, if we have a look at the healthcare space, one of the needs might be live longer. Once you've identified the need, you inevitably put together your next generation product or service. Inevitably, if you're building a product or service nowadays, it involves technology. So we have a whole bunch of exponential technologies on the right that you can pick and choose from to make your new product. Once you've made your new product, you've got to get it into the market. And this is where it's got to be accessible. If the product isn't accessible, no one can buy it. It's got to be easy to adopt. You know, imagine the iPhone. If the iPhone was very, very difficult to adopt, or smartphones were difficult to adopt, I guarantee none of you would have a smartphone now. You've got cultural bias. Some people will adopt some things faster than others. If you have a look at self-driving cars, there are people basically who say they will never get in one, and there are people who are clamoring to get into them. Geopolitics. If you're a Chinese organization trying to build something in America, good luck with that, and vice versa. Liability. Yeah? If, for example, we have a look at gene editing, yeah? We have the power to do amazing things with gene editing, but if something goes wrong, who's liable? And then we have network effects and regulators. If you create the ultimate life extension product that helps people become immortal, and if these things come together in the right way, you disrupt entire industries. And then as you start changing one industry, every industry is connected. So for example, we take the cost of energy down to zero. All of your companies use energy. If we change transportation, all of your companies use transportation and logistics. So whatever happens in one industry ultimately ripples across every other industry. And it's this huge effect. So one of the ways I would characterize where we're headed is increasingly all of these different technologies are helping us democratize and decentralize services, whatever those services are. As you're sitting in the audience or as you're sitting on a gate based on the field, if you step back 100 years ago, you couldn't do online shopping. You couldn't transfer money between one bank account and another. You couldn't have a healthcare checkup. You couldn't speak to somebody on the other side of the planet. So all of these technologies are helping us democratize and decentralize everything, including healthcare. including, to a degree, primary healthcare. We'll talk about that. In addition to that, basically, particularly with a sort of healthcare spin, a lot of these technologies, as they become more ubiquitous, as they get in our faces more, they're also starting to get us to ask, what does it mean to be human? Yeah? The media talk a lot about automation. Increasingly, there are more people around the world that say, what can I do, basically, that a machine can't do? What does it fundamentally mean for me to be a human? So we're on the cusp, basically, of a new epoch, and it gets faster from here. So, how many of you believe in magic? Do you know one? Okay. Fortunately, I gave a talk at an event in December, basically, and there was one person in the audience held his hand up. I said, oh, that's great, you believe in magic. What do you do? He said, I'm the magician. Arthur C. Clarke basically sort of said this: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So here's some magic. In 2017, we created an alien. All of you have 4 base paired DNA. This alien has 6. We have AGCT. This alien has AGCT and X and Y. That gene editing experiment alone fundamentally changes in the future, the far future, a whole variety of different industries. Holograms. How many of you seen holograms on the TV? Yeah, there we go. You ever seen a real life hologram? No glass, no augmented reality, no gimmicks, no tricks. That is the world's first bona fide free air hologram. And it's created using nanocellulose that is suspended in air and lasers. Today, it's about this big. End of the year, it'll be a bit bigger. 2 years' time, it'll be a bit bigger. And then we'll start commercializing the tech, and in 10 to 15 years' time, you'll be able to buy one of these off the shelf. Multicolored. Science fiction right there. In 2015, DARPA uploaded knowledge to people's brains. They took a set of fighter pilots up to 35,000 feet. They had skull caps on. They recorded their brain waves. They put the F-35s back into a flat spin and dropped them. All of the Top Gun fighter pilots landed the F-35s, took them out of spin. They then took in 30 different volunteers who'd never been in an aircraft before, because the brain, some of you might know, but it's plastic. They replayed the brain waves basically to these 30 volunteers, basically 60% of the volunteers landed the aircraft out of a flat spin. The 40% that didn't land the aircraft didn't land it because they didn't have the tactile responsiveness to do it. Critics at the time said, well, okay, you uploaded knowledge, but you only did it for 20 minutes. And the scientists at the time said, kind of missing the point. We now have around $500 million worth of venture capital funding as well as US government funding going into these programs. Molecular assembly. Towards the start of last year, we created molecular-sized robots, put them into a molecular-sized production line, and you can read all about this. If you want to go and create your own, you can do it, and got them to assemble molecules. The world's first molecular assembler. Again, very basic, very early stage, kind of generation 0.01, but nevertheless, a molecular assembler. Something that in the 1960s, I said, was impossible. We're also able to live stream information from people's brains. By using artificial intelligence, brain-machine interfaces, and fMRI scanners, we can live stream someone's brain to YouTube. And if you're looking at this thinking, well, you know, it's a bit grainy, you're absolutely right. 2 years ago, this was kind of black and white and very grainy. But we can do this with faces, we can do this with movies. If you're watching a YouTube movie, basically then we can play that back as well. Still kind of this grainy sort of situation. But what we're doing here is we are decoding information from billions of neurons in real time and feeding it straight onto a TV. And while it's grainy, I'll bet mostly that some of you can make out what some of these shapes are. The New York Police Department is starting to use this technology to identify muggers. They just go, think of the mugger, and it's about 80% accurate. They've got an advanced version of this. So it's already finding its way basically into society. Telepathy. How many of you played Tetris? Yeah. Still using a glass screen? About 2-3 months ago, a bunch of scientists hooked up 3 people to a telepathic network using TMS devices and all sorts of bits and bobs. And these people played telepathic Tetris. The interesting thing about that particular technology is if you have enough of these TMS devices, etc., you can take it to internet scale. Again, generation 0.01. Tractor beams, science fiction or science fact? You should know by now. This is from the University of Bristol up the road. This is an ultrasonic tractor beam. We can also do this with light as well and all sorts of other bits. It's not just sound that we can manipulate objects with. However, this is sort of where some of these technologies start hitting the road. On the one hand, what we have is an emerging technology, aka a tractor beam. If you take that tractor beam and you combine it with another emerging technology, a 3D printer, you can do this. You can now get a 3D printer that prints electronics, components and stuff. And you can use the tractor beam to assemble that stuff. This revolutionizes manufacturing, for example, smartphone manufacturing with Hon Hai or Foxconn. Again, generation 0.2, 0.3 in that case, where we went from first tractor beam to first commercial product in the space of about 4 years. And now, these tractor beams are so advanced we can control multiple bits and balls, multiple sort of balls and everything else. You can thread them through the eye of a needle. So they have an application in robotic surgery. But as I mentioned, a lot of people tend to talk in terms of a few emerging technologies, say 5 or 10, maybe 20. But there's a lot more than that. So what I'm going to show you now basically is my first 2019 radar. It's got 169 game-changing emerging technologies on it. It goes from the dates of 2020 to 2060, and it's got 12 major categories. There are about 25 general-purpose technologies. Those general-purpose technologies are useful across every single industry. They improve rapidly, so you can innovate them very, very quickly. Things like AI, for example. AI basically is a general-purpose technology. You can use it across any industry. And then, in addition to that, they spawn innovation. This is the radar. Every single dot on this radar represents a technology basically with an addressable market opportunity of at least $500 billion. Every single dot and every single technology basically on this radar can transform an industry or something substantial. So, for example, on the right-hand side, we have 3D bioprinting. If you take number 1 and number 2 in advanced manufacturing, you can 3D print a human spinal cord basically in 1.6 seconds. A working one, by the way, as well. If we start having a look at things like 4D printing, you can create robots that literally walk off the printer. Nanomanufacturing, come to that a little bit later. Things like anti-aging drugs, CRISPR gene editing, high-resolution fMRI. Basically, if you're in neuroscience, basically then fMRI basically is king. Let's just do all sorts of things. Labs on chips. If you want to be able to get products to market or drugs to market faster, labs on chips are a fantastic way to do that. And the FDA have just approved all of those. In addition to that, basically we've got a whole bunch of stuff. We have compute systems. Increasingly, we have biological, chemical, DNA computers. University of Manchester has built a DNA computer. Over in China, basically we've built 5 generations now of biological computers where we've turned a bacteria into a computer storage device and a computer, and replayed movies from it. We also have things like liquid computing as we start stretching out. A couple of years ago we created a liquid transistor, and a few weeks ago we created a liquid computer chip. We have quantum computers. You guys basically are probably already used to quantum computers. They're arriving in the short term. And it's more than likely basically that you've been advised to go and get a point of view on the impact that quantum computers, which are 100 million times faster than traditional computers, will have on your business and your risk modeling and all that sort of stuff. We have 5G and 6G coming through. 6G based by 2030, that'll be the first commercial network, probably based out of China. We operate at terabit speeds. We have delay-tolerant networks, basically that are going in, and they work interplanetary. We have nil communication, number 8, based on connectivity. That's a weird one. That's sending information, and this has been proven, that is sending information using quantum waves without sending information, which is a really odd one. WiGig, if you take 5G and WiGig, just those 2 technologies, you fundamentally disrupt all of the telcos. And then on the energy side of things, basically we have a whole raft of stuff. Basically we have everything from nuclear batteries, which is important basically if you're in the aerospace industry, but also nuclear batteries. Basically if you put a nuclear battery basically into a pacemaker, the battery never runs out. And we have ways to do that. We have piezoelectric energy systems. So again, when we talk about smart devices, we can create smart fabrics. When you start taking some of these new computing models and you start combining them with new energy systems, all of a sudden you have smart clothing like you've never had before. It makes today's wearables basically look fairly run-of-the-mill. On the artificial intelligence side, today we have artificial narrow intelligence. By about 2030, 2035, we'll have artificial general intelligence. So in 2018, Google created the world's first AGI. It's an AGI basically called Impala, and very few people know about it. It can do 30 tasks simultaneously. So you accelerate this stuff out. Artificial superintelligence, that's a game changer. It actually come about 2045, most experts reckon. And then we've got DNA neural networks. Do you think that artificial intelligence is just going to be binary or based on quantum computing? We've already used DNA to create a DNA neural network. We've also created what we call diffractive neural networks, which is a AI that you print. So what we can do with artificial intelligence changes. And then we have a whole bunch of different materials. If we have a look at polymers, if we have a look at things like hydrogels. In the biomedical industry, no one really cares about hydrogels, except hydrogels basically are now making a lot of these 3D printed organs that we talk about possible. Without them, it wouldn't be possible. On the security side of things, we have Morpheus computing platforms coming out of the US. These computing platforms are self-configuring and self-reconfiguring at the hardware and software level. They are the computer equivalent of a Rubik's Cube, and they are unhackable. And then we have quantum networks starting to come through. And most of this stuff, if you look at the circles, a fair amount of this stuff is the next 20 years. And bearing in mind these general purpose technologies all add into each other, this stuff accelerates. And then on the user interface side of things, we have avatars, we've got hypersurfaces, keyboard and mouse basically is dead. Behavioral computing, we're going to be talking to computers more and more. And it goes on and on and on. And then bioreactors again. If you take a bioreactor, you can put a stem cell into a bioreactor, grow a fillet steak. You decentralize and democratize basically the agricultural industry. You turn the Middle East basically from being a food importer to a food exporter. China just bought $300 million basically of clean meat. So meat without the animals. And that's all just the start. But you take all of these things together, and if you want to understand what the future of devices are, the future of smartphones are, for example, or the future of wearables, everything's in there. And if you want to have a little bit of an explore, just go to the web URL at the top, and you can have a little bit of a sort of play around if you like. But let's get a little bit personal now. Bearing in mind that you live in the healthcare industry, You already know what the power of genetic profiling. We can increasingly decode the human genome, individual genes, to understand what each gene expression does. And we can feed that into models and we can say, you are likely to get cancer, or whatever it happens to be. On the tech side of things, we talk about wearables, but increasingly there's a lot more, basically on the technology side, than just things like smart wearables or smart clothing. You know, the chairs that you're sitting in can have sensors. We can figure out what your posture is, and there's even more coming. So when you have a look at the development of individual sensors and you start wrapping those basically into the objects basically that we consume, that we live by, that are on us, there's a huge amount of information that we can pull based off a standard individual even today. But what about this one? If we take brain-machine interfaces and we start compressing them, we start miniaturizing them, we can now put brain-machine interfaces and neural interfaces into hard hats and into clothing. They did this in China, where they put brain-machine interfaces into the caps, basically, of railway drivers. On the one hand, basically, the company that did it, it was a state-run company, said that they believed that it helped them save $245 million in lost productivity. Because these brain-machine interfaces were reading people's emotions. So as a train driver basically was getting a little bit tired, that was fed back to the system, they changed the shift. So with all of this, as we increasingly decode people's physiology and biology, and as we increasingly get into people's heads, where is the privacy line? And that basically line is becoming increasingly blurred, and increasingly everything that you thought of as private is becoming either public or it's becoming data fodder. And this is where, as organizations, on the one hand, basically how you market yourselves basically to consumers. Look, what we're going to be able to do is we can use this quantified self to help you live a better, healthier life. Or, a little bit like Facebook, we can take all of this quantified information basically and we can use it to our own ends. Increasingly, consumers, basically, I think, are going to start lining up with organizations that they feel basically are working in the consumer's interests, not their own self-serving interests. But then in addition to that, as we start having a look at exponential healthcare itself, let's go and walk through some of the treatments. So here we literally talk about the future of you. And this goes over the next 40 years. Remember that this stuff accelerates. So today we talk about wearables. If you have something like an Apple Watch and everything else, it'll monitor your heart rate, it'll do a couple of bits and bobs, monitor your activity, that's fine. But what if we had a medical tricorder? Shall I show one off? Okay. So, if I did this, and you all ask me, what are you doing? I say, well, and I'm supposed to be talking to you all, but I'm just checking my skin for skin cancer. I'm using my phone, the camera, and artificial intelligence. That's about 93% accurate. It's great if you're in Australia or Africa. If I then do this, and I start talking to the phone, you go, well, what are you doing now? And we have these platforms today. I say, well, I'm just checking myself for dementia, actually. I know that you lot basically think that I sound quite crazy, basically, so I'm just checking myself for dementia. But fortunately, hey, I'm okay. Because when you start getting dementia, your voice patterns change. We can analyze that. If I talk into the phone again, basically say, well, what are you doing now? I say, well, I'm just checking to see whether or not I'm ill. You know, when you get a gravelly cough, your voice changes. If I now do this, and I look like I'm taking a selfie, and you go, what are you doing now? Get back to us, we're the important ones. I say, I'm sorry, just checking myself for pancreatic cancer. Because when you get pancreatic cancer, your skin tone changes and your eyes go slightly yellow. These cameras can pick it up. And then finally, he said, well, what are you doing now? I said, well, I'm just checking basically for arrhythmia. We can use artificial intelligence combined with the accelerometers on these phones to check the condition of our hearts. That is all for starters. This could be a $50 phone in Africa. I'm working with a smartphone company that will be doing this. We package all of that up as a free app, and we democratize access to basic healthcare for 300 million Africans. In addition to that, if I use a little 3D printed lens, I can turn this into a lab-grade microscope. That's for starters. That's what we have today. This isn't science fiction. But then, what if I took all of that stuff? So I took the cameras and the AI, basically, and I took the speakers that are in here, and I shoved it, basically, into a room, into a porta cabin, basically, into a capsule, into a self-driving car. So now you get into your your Mercedes or Audi self-driving car, and when you step in, it goes, your health seems okay today. Tick. Does Mercedes and does Audi and all the other car manufacturers out there all of a sudden become a healthcare provider? So as I say, technology helps us democratize and decentralize services and lower the cost to near zero in almost all cases. So moving a little bit further on, you all know basically, or it's likely you all know that we can 3D print different organs. So whether it's heart tissue, whether it's liver or kidney tissue, recently we've been able to print blood vessels, liver, we've also been able to print spinal cords. We can 3D print bone, cartilage, go in the eye, forgot the name, I would say cataract, but we don't really want to 3D print a cataract to put that in someone's eye. So there's lots and lots here. But again, this is just kind of one technology. This is 3D bioprinting combined with stem cells, combined with hydrogels, and you put those together and you start transforming basically how you deliver healthcare. You get rid of the donor system. In 20 years' time, basically, this will be way ahead. This stuff is already being used. You know, we're already 3D printing bones and teeth and implanting them into people basically who've had cancer and all that sort of stuff. Design of humans. Yeah, there was a huge sort of mess made about the Chinese scientists recently. But what a lot of people don't know is that in 2015, scientists in the US genetically engineered an E. coli bacteria to be resistant to every single pathogen on Earth. Because viruses replicate in a particular way. So you can mess around with the telomeres. So here, and then similarly, basically in Rio 2016, the IOC started putting out tests for genetically engineered humans. So as you start putting your health insurance plans together and all that kind of stuff, you should probably start asking the question, have you or any of your relatives been genetically engineered or re-engineered? And there's something even more on this a little bit later. Stem cells, again, we're using stem cells to grow bones, teeth, and everything else. On the teeth front, University of Nottingham have created a metamaterial. So if you have a filling, and you are, say, Denplan, you go in, you have a filling today, you have say, do you want white filling or a grey amalgam filling? You go, I'll have a white amalgam filling. 10 to 20 years later, that filling breaks, you go back in, basically Denplan have to go and pay out again. You know, so what, a crown, 300 quid? If you didn't have an amalgam filling, but you had a metamaterial filling, your tooth would have grown back. So in 10 to 20 years' time, you don't go back with a cracked crown. So now, does Denplan have to avoid paying out? So these are some of the implications. Robot surgeons. There have been lots of advances in robot surgeons. We've got a robot neurosurgeon that operates in the lab. It's not been let on people yet. 50 times faster than a human neurosurgeon. We have platforms like Vesuvius. We also have platforms like the Leonardo, the Da Vinci robots. So increasingly, when you start taking robotics, plus artificial intelligence, plus machine vision, that's the key one. You can now start doing some interesting things with robotics. And this is a world first from a couple of weeks ago. So this is a remote robotic surgery over a 5G network. You couldn't do this over a 4G network. You need 5G because the latency is 0.1 seconds. So if you have a shortage of surgeons in the UK, in Africa, in Asia, wherever it happens to be, the US military are rolling this out into the battlefield. They're testing it now. Is this an option? So do the healthcare plans that you offer say, by the way, if a surgeon isn't available, we can provide you with one from another country. Democratization and decentralization of services. In this case, it was taking the liver out of a, by the look of it, a pig. If you want to go and buy this, you can buy it. This is current tech. The next phase of this tech base is still being developed and everything else, but this is the technology that's here today. Wi-Fi. What if I could turn the Wi-Fi in this room and in your homes into a smart device? What if I could do and monitor you in the same way using Wi-Fi that I monitor you with an Apple Watch? I could monitor your emotions. I could monitor your heart rate, your behaviors, your gait, all sorts of other things. What we can do is, if you take Wi-Fi plus artificial intelligence, you turn a standard home broadband router, and you can buy this, you can get it basically from an MIT spin-off. You can put this into someone's homes, and all of a sudden you have a new way to figure out, has the elderly person fallen over? Has Brian taken his meds? Whatever it happens to be. Wi-Fi. Don't think for 1 minute that smart devices, wearables, the quantify itself is just relegated basically to something that you have on your watch, basically, or a belt buckle, basically, or a waistcoat, or whatever it happens to be. We're finding all sorts of innovative ways to do new things. AI consultants. Increasingly, AI consultants basically are going to be doing more and more impressive things. One of the biggest problems that we have rolling out AI consultants outside of just general training and their general capability at the moment, unless basically they're analysing sort of static images like radiology and bits and bobs, is regulation. Because a lot of these AIs are black boxes. So before AI can really start moving into healthcare properly, in a healthcare sort of primary care setting, we need to kind of get over the explainable AI problem. And we're doing that. We even have AIs basically out of Australia that take all of the different scans basically of your body, compile them together, runs an assessment and says, you've got about 10 years left to live based on the fact you've got a blockage in your coronary artery, based on the fact you've got a dodgy liver, and based on all this baseline information that we've got over here. So these things basically will improve at an accelerated rate. And in terms of one of the biggest problems basically with AIs in healthcare is access to relevant training data. We now have a way to create synthetic data that we can use to train these AIs to get just as accurate results. We have something called federated AI models, there's all sorts of other bits and bobs. So AIs basically accelerate. Blood tests. We now have blood tests, again basically from Australia, that can be done, that tell you basically your level of chronic pain. One of the biggest problems that people with chronic pain have, and my wife has chronic pain, is you go into a doctor and say, I'm in so much pain, and the doctor looks at you and sort of goes, I don't really want to give you any more opioids or anything else. Go away. We actually have a blood test now that can identify the individual biomarkers responsible for chronic pain to give a score. It's going through trials. We also have a single blood test that takes about 2 hours that is able to identify every known pathogen on Earth. So all of a sudden, blood tests become sort of much more useful and faster. Labs on chips, I explained this one a little bit earlier, but increasingly we have liver on a chip, heart on a chip, blood vessel on a chip, leg on a chip, fish on chips, all that kind of stuff. When you start putting these together, you end up with the concept basically of human on a chip. So if you have a new drug and you want to test the efficacy of that new drug, you can use these. They cost about 2 cents to manufacture, and it means you don't have to go to human trials until you're really sure. but you can speed up the testing of your new drugs by around, depends on the drug, but you can speed it up by about 60 to 80%. So all of a sudden, we have drugs coming through the system faster. Digital avatars, basically this is being rolled out by the US military again. So what we do basically is, this is the concept behind this one, and this will probably come to the NHS soon, is we take all of the scans of you, MRI, CAT scan, X-ray, ultrasound, all those kind of good things, and we can again pull that together basically into one single, what we call digital twin. It's actually a hangover basically from the manufacturing industry. This digital twin is a digital replica of you, down to the cellular level. That's a baseline. Now, in the US, the reason why they're creating this type of baseline is if people go into battle and they get injured by an IED or something like that, the idea behind these is that you can take the information from that baseline, including the genetic profiles and everything else, and then you can 3D print the person off a new liver. And then you can have a robotic surgeon install or implant basically that new liver on the battlefield. So again, all these technologies start coming together. Typically some of this stuff starts in the military and then it eventually gets into civilian society. Paralysis. Again, if you're in the healthcare insurance industry, step back 10 years ago, basically someone says, I've had a car crash, I've fractured my spinal cord, I'm paralyzed. I am paralyzed for life. As an insurance organisation, inevitably most insurers will pay out about £1.5 million basically in that type of scenario. By using carbon nanotubes, by using synthetic nerve cells, by using a whole variety of different bits and bobs, we now have patients who are completely paralysed because, for example, they were stabbed in the back 47 times like a French journalist was a while ago, and they can now walk. Paralysis is no longer necessarily for life. Memory editing. So this one, admittedly, sounds a little bit science fiction, but increasingly we are able to edit out addiction or addictive memories. And while it's still a bit of an edgy science for obvious reasons, there are companies, basically organisations, again, particularly in the West, that are now having much, much more success with this. So increasingly expect memory editing basically to come through as a thing. Inherited conditions. If you had a condition like Hunter's syndrome, which is an incredibly painful syndrome that accumulates basically over 20 years, and you went to a GP in the UK and said, what have I got? And the GP said, unfortunately for you, you have an inherited genetic condition. It's called Hunter's syndrome. In about 20 years' time, basically, you'll die a very, very painful death. Was there anything I could do about that? No, sorry. In the US last year, we used a CRISPR gene editing serum and did and again, you can look this up, put it into an IV, infused it into a patient that had Hunter's syndrome. It latched on to the faulty genes, corrected them. It also got around the blood-brain barrier as well, because that's one of the problems basically with Hunter's syndrome, some syndromes. In vivo gene editing. That individual no longer has Hunter's syndrome. So what happens basically when an inherited genetic disease is no longer for life? Neural prosthetics, people with dementia. This again basically comes out of the US military, comes out of DARPA. This was originally tested on rats. So this is, the information on this slide basically is actually current day. The reason why the date along the top is kind of 2025 is because that's when these technologies start creeping basically into the commercial world. DARPA managed to create neural prosthetics basically with a whole bunch of universities and hospitals over in the States that boosted memory performance and memory retention by up to 35%. But again, this is a case of using advanced materials, advanced sensors, and again, artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence modulates the brain waves, basically and corrects the things that are going wrong. The big C. Over in China, as well as the US, but particularly in China, because regular healthcare regulations are a little bit laxer over there, they've created what they're calling basically the first cancer vaccine. And it's not quite a vaccine, but they inject, again, a CRISPR serum into 64 patients basically that had terminal cancer, and it all rescinded. So when we start thinking about cancer vaccines, again, This isn't here now as a commercial product, but this is the stuff that we're doing in the labs, and it's coming out. This is an interesting one. This came out about 2-3 weeks ago. There was a breakthrough basically with something called messenger RNA over in the US. If you combine inhalable messenger RNA basically with gene editing tools, all of a sudden you can put a aerosol into a nebulizer or an inhaler, and you can now cure cystic fibrosis with an inhaler. So again, these things are sort of, as you look at the timeline across the top, it's starting to eke out. Contagious vaccines, again, coming out of the US. What happens if I don't have to give you all a vaccine in flu season? What happens if I just give one of you the vaccine and then you give it to everybody else? Contagious vaccines. It's a good thing and a bad thing because you could also end up transmitting a whole variety of nasty things depending on how they built the contagious vaccines. But we kind of get over that herd immunity problem. Nanotech. Increasingly, basically, we have nanobots basically with enzyme engines basically that are able to go around the bloodstream doing different things, picking up biomarkers. So we have a nanobot at the moment that goes around the bloodstream. It picks up a particular biomarker called CT63A. It's a DNA fragment. That DNA fragment basically is indicative of cancer. So as these little nanobots basically go around the bloodstream, they're able to identify whether or not you have cancer 2 to 3 years before it actually manifests. So as opposed to going to the hospital, staying in the hospital and saying, you have cancer, let's put you through an immunotherapy program, what happens basically when they say, they will go to your GP, get you checked out, maybe give you a pill. However, again, sort of 2 to 3 weeks ago, we did this, and I've been looking out for this for about the past 3 years, because this stuff's inevitable. Whether or not we'll use it is a regulator question. What you're watching here basically are nanoparticles which can be put together basically to form nanobots. They can then be put together to form a little micro swarm. And you can then direct these round and through the human body to go and unclog arteries. So eventually, these do invasive surgery. This stuff could eventually make keyhole surgery basically look like we're using wooden clubs. But in addition to that, it's not just enough to be able to create nanobots that can go and unclog arteries and all that sort of stuff. We need to be able to know where these things are. So Carnegie Mellon, about 2 years ago, created a GPS for nanobots so that we can understand where they are. Where are they? What are they up to? You probably don't want too many nanobots basically loose in your bloodstream. Again, generation kind of 0.2 now. The regulators will have a field day with this. So again, this is another example of where we have some really intriguing technologies today available to us. But the regulators will go, how the hell do we regulate that? Which means this stuff won't show up for probably 20 or 30 years. Age as a service, we have companies in America that are already coming up with the concept of age as a service. One of the biggest problems basically with curing aging is that it's not a disease. You've got to be able to classify aging as a disease first, because then you can create a cure that you take to a regulator, and then the regulator then says, right, we will now allow you to go and treat aging. So there are a number of different anti-aging products, some that I'm actually using, obviously, that have been shown to extend life, basically in rats in that case, because rats are always basically sort of being used, by 30%. This is, and look at the timeline, we're now starting to push out. This is another odd one. What happens basically if you lose a limb? Today, basically, if you lose a limb, you have a prosthetic limb, and that might be a neurological or neuro-basic prosthetic or whatever it happens to be that you can control with your mind. However, if you take if you take a progesterone cocktail and you put it onto a silk scarf, you can use that progesterone cocktail, combine it basically again with some gene editing tools to start regrowing limbs. Now, this is mainly thanks to a frog. So these frogs have very, very basic regenerative healing capabilities. And what this particular technology did is it reactivated some of their genes. So again, you won't see this basically anywhere near a traditional hospital basically for decades. But when we look at regenerative medicine, the ability basically to regrow lost body parts and limbs and all that sort of stuff, we're making some quite interesting strides there. Biocomputing. I've already said that we've already created biological computers. We've also created biological computers out of human liver cells, because it's very difficult to go from a bacteria to something like a rat to human or mammalian cells. So again, as we start extending out, basically, we've already proved this in the lab. We turned human liver cells into miniature biological supercomputers. They then identify particular diseases, and then the DNA factories within these cells were then tasked with creating the drugs to go and cure the disease. Wormholes, bit of an odd one, but I stuck it in simply because it's a bit of a sci-fi. In around 2017, a bunch of scientists came up with what they called a magnetic wormhole. We had a magnetic wormhole here, the magnetic field was over here, it was over here, but it disappeared in the middle. If this technology ever sort of takes off, which might not, then this means that you can have a CAT scan or an MRI scan, basically while walking around the room. So just a quirky one for you there. And then as we start looking basically at bringing people back from the dead, we actually have CEOs in US Fortune 100 organizations that are going to a company called Soul Machines. And because we've all got so much information out there, they're saying, create an avatar of me. So what we do is we create a high definition avatar. Basically, this avatar basically is called Ava. She's actually being used by Rolls-Royce and Daimler basically in their customer service division. But she also moonlights basically bringing CEOs back from the dead. So what we do basically is we use all of this information that we have about us basically on the web or the internet and everything else, pull it back and create an avatar. That avatar basically is the sum of our experiences, personalities, social interactions and all that kind of stuff. And the idea here behind, the idea behind this with some of the Fortune 100 CIOs is they say, well, when I die, the board of Unilever or whoever it happens to be, if they are stuck, if we're doing a big M&A deal and they're a bit stuck and they want some advice, they can just tee me up and go, Brian, doing a deal here. What do you think about it? And then Brian can come back and say, well, I don't think it's a great idea because I had a really, really bad time basically with the executives basically over at that company. This is a thing. But then in addition to that, basically when we take that one step forward, in 2018, we were able to take the DNA of someone who died 300 years ago, compile it basically with the DNA of 25 of his known relatives to recreate his genome. You combine that with synthetic biology and a variety of other things basically that Harvard, MIT, University College of London are doing, because by 2035 they reckon they could create an artificial human, an artificial genome. And all of a sudden, you can now start potentially bringing back dead relatives, which is probably a bit freaky. You then start combining that basically with memory transfer technologies, and again, 2018, basically we transferred memories between two snails, so again, you've got to start somewhere. So what you have here is you have a way either to digitally recreate somebody after they've died, for whatever reason, or you increasingly have the opportunity basically to bring someone back from the dead and then transplant their memories basically from Facebook, which would be fun. So basically when you say, when we talk about Facebook hoovering up all of our information, if you're into this kind of stuff, you actually want them to have more information on you rather than less. So how does that change the privacy game? Basically if we now say, tell you what, give us all your information, tell us your personalities and your desires and your hobbies and all that sort of stuff and who you're related to, and when you die we'll create a digital avatar of yourself. And then finally, we end up getting to the point where technology that is either near us or on us eventually goes into us. That is a massive, massive cultural shift, because I'm sure many of you probably don't want too much technology within you. I doubt you really want a smartphone inserted in you. It's probably quite painful. And if this is what we're doing today, what are we going to be able to achieve tomorrow? And that's it. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed the time traveling. And thank you very much. I will now pass it back to Kenny.
Well, if that doesn't make you think, nothing will do.